This is Brett the Hitman Hart, and you're watching another original wrestling documentary.
The story of Davey Boy Smith and Tom Billington is a fascinating exploration of family, fame, and the toll of professional wrestling. The two cousins share a journey that brought them from humble beginnings in England to global stardom, but their paths diverged drastically as they grappled with personal and professional challenges. Their bond, marked by both camaraderie and conflict, tells a cautionary tale about the highs and lows of life in the wrestling business. Tom Billington was born on December 5, 1958. Growing up in a working-class family, he developed an early interest in wrestling. Inspired by his father's involvement in local grappling contests, Billington's small stature did not deter him. Instead, it motivated him to hone his craft. He quickly gained a reputation for his unparalleled athleticism and high-risk style, becoming a standout talent in the UK wrestling scene. Davey Boy Smith was born on November 27, 1962, and was Billington's younger cousin. Unlike Billington, Smith initially lacked technical finesse, but possessed incredible natural strength and athleticism. With Billington's guidance, Smith entered the wrestling world, trained to refine his skills and build a foundation for his career.
My last match in England was in Chester, just a few days before I left. I was wrestling Rocco. Ted was there, and my dad as usual, and this time he'd brought my cousin, Davey Boy Smith, to watch the show. He would have been 13 or 14 years old at that time, and he'd just started training at Ted's gym. Even back then I could see how looked up to me, saw what I'd achieved, and wanted the same for himself. I left for Calgary, Alberta, Canada, on April 27, 1978, with £20 in my pocket. My dad came to see me off at the airport. I said, "Bye, Dad. See you in June." Well, things didn't go exactly as I planned, and I didn't see him in June. But when I left England that day, I really had no idea it would be 13 years before I'd be back. I remember talking to Stu one day and telling him about my cousin back in England, Davey Boy Smith, and how he was coming along. Stu was interested. He knew Ted had trained him, and that he'd had some matches with Giant Haystacks and Big Daddy. Stampede was doing okay, business-wise, and he was always looking out for new faces. So I rang Davey Boy Smith and said, "Dave, how would you like to come out to Calgary?" And as you would imagine, straight away he said, "Yeah, when?" I said, "Make it for next month, then you won't mess up Max Crabtree's schedule." Stu paid for his air ticket, and when he first arrived in Canada, he moved in with me.
Stampede was a proving ground for technical wrestlers, and both cousins thrived in this environment.
Most people assumed, in later years, that because we were first cousins, we'd been close friends from the start. But he was 5 years younger than me, just a kid when I left England. I'd trained in Ted's gym with him, at most, a handful of times, so, no, at first I didn't know Davey Boy Smith at all. But for the first few months in Stampede, I wrestled him. Dynamite Kid versus Davey Boy Smith. He was the babyface, I was the heel, which straight away caused a bit of a problem for the Harts. One night, Brett came round to my apartment. At that time he had his own place just a couple of blocks away from me, with a worried look on his face, and he said, "Tom, this is a really bad idea, you know." I said, "What do you mean, Brett? We can't have Davey sharing an apartment with you when you're wrestling him every Friday night on TV. Everyone will see what's going on." Having him move in with me hadn't been my choice anyway, so I shouted, "Dave, pack your bags. You're moving in with Brett."
Training in the notorious Hart Dungeon, Billington perfected his technical and high-flying abilities, while Smith's power-based style evolved. Together they debuted as a tag team, blending Billington's innovative maneuvers with Smith's raw strength. Their chemistry was undeniable, and they quickly rose to prominence in Stampede Wrestling, winning the Stampede International Tag Team Championship multiple times.
Not long afterward, Davey Boy Smith was back, knocking on my door, wanting a favor. He said, "Tommy, I want to be big like these other wrestlers." Bear in mind, when he first left England to come to Canada, he looked like a matchstick. I said, "Well, you need some steroids." "Yeah, but I don't know nobody." That was how he talked then, before he got his American accent. "Well, Dave, I'll give you a couple of shots right now if you want, just to start you off, but don't tell anybody." I drew the stuff up, a thick white liquid, and then I gave him 2 injections, one in each arse cheek. I told him, This is Winstrol V water-based steroid. I'm giving you 2 CCS in one cheek and 2 CCS in the other. So, off he went, I imagine, feeling very pleased with himself.
Their success in Canada caught the attention of promoters worldwide, including Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. In 1984, the WWF signed the British Bulldogs. This move coincided with Vince McMahon's national expansion, offering the cousins a platform to showcase their talents to a global audience.
When they called again from the WWF to arrange a meeting, I said I was interested. And because I knew we were a good tag team, I told them about my cousin, Davey Boy Smith. They flew us to Toronto for a meeting with Vince McMahon and George Scott. We were in a press conference room at the Howard Johnson Hotel by the airport, where we sat and talked for about half an hour. Vince was friendly, and what he seemed most interested in was the fact that me and Davey Boy Smith were first cousins, and that we were British. It was during that meeting that he came up with the idea of the British Bulldogs. He laughed and said, "Well, you look like a pair of bulldogs, and if I think about it, what with the steroids, and our mean-looking faces, I suppose we did." Anyway, after the small talk, Vince got serious. He said, "Well, what do you think? Do you want to come along or not?" I looked at Davey and said, "What do you want to do?" Well, as I expected, he never even opened his mouth, so I said to Vince, "Okay, we'll give it a try."
1986, when they defeated Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake to win the WWF Tag Team Championship. Managed by Lou Albano and accompanied by their pet bulldog Matilda, the Bulldogs became one of the most beloved tag teams of the 1980s. Despite their success, cracks began to form in their relationship. Billington's intense personality and punishing in-ring style led to injuries and backstage conflicts. Meanwhile, Smith's ambition for a singles career created tension between the two. Behind the scenes, Billington's temper and confrontational nature alienated colleagues. A notorious incident occurred in 1988 when Jacques Rougeau struck Billington with a roll of quarters, allegedly in retaliation for months of bullying. This altercation would worsen the strain between Billington and Smith as Smith began distancing himself.
They brought a stretcher out to ringside and got me back to the dressing room. I was nearly passing out with the pain as they carried the stretcher out to the ambulance. My left leg started twitching violently, and the paramedics cut my wrestling tights off with scissors and strapped it down to keep it still. I found out later it was nerve damage in my back that was causing it, but at that point I had no idea what was wrong. They took me to a hospital in Hamilton, but there were no empty beds, so they gave me a painkiller, an injection of Demerol or morphine, and left me in the corridor on the stretcher. I thought to myself, these bastards don't believe I'm hurt because I'm a wrestler. King Tonga came with me in the ambulance and stayed with me all that night. Davey just got changed and went back to the hotel. Eventually an ambulance came from Toronto to take me to the airport, and somebody called Vince McMahon to tell him what had happened. When they got me on the plane, they had to put 3 seats down for the stretcher, but Vince sorted all that out and paid for the seats. When we landed in Calgary, another ambulance was waiting to take me straight to Holy Cross Hospital, where I hoped they were going to find out what had happened to me. I knew it must have been bad, from the way I went down and lost control of my legs. Davey, who I hadn't seen or heard from since the night I got injured, finally showed up at the hospital, with his wife, Diana Hart-Smith, and a press photographer. And those 2 pricks posed at the side of my bed, had their picture taken, and went. They never came to see me again. The next day, that picture made the front page of the Calgary Sun newspaper. Once I'd come back to wrestling, things seemed different between myself and Davey Boy Smith. We didn't fall out or have words. Well, he wouldn't have had the nerve anyway. I did lose my temper with him one time, I think, after I asked him to do me a favor and he said he couldn't, so I blew up at him. I brought you to Canada, took you to Japan, got you in the WWF, you are nothing but a selfish bastard. And all Davey could say was, "Yeah, Tommy, you're right, I'm sorry." You have done a lot for me." Davey was a follower, never a leader, and he'd always been happy with my decisions, and usually, I decided right. And those first few years as a tag team, we'd got along great. Now though, things seemed a little bit different.
That wouldn't be the end of the drama for the Bulldogs. The infamous backstage incident with Jacques Rougeau further distanced the cousins.
So yes, I did get along with Davey. I did my best to look after him because he was my cousin, and when it came to looking good in the ring, I made him look better than me. But it was all one way, op. For example, when I was in hospital all those weeks, he never came to see me, apart from when there was a photo opportunity. He couldn't even be bothered to call me. But he did call his family, who were also my aunt and uncle, at home in Golborne in Lancashire, and told them that I was so messed up with drugs, I was probably going to die soon. Of course, their David was Mr. Clean. I didn't find out about all this until a few years later, so I let a lot of things that bothered me about Davey go unmentioned. The second annual Survivor Series was at the Richfield Coliseum in Ohio again. We teamed up with the Rockers, the Hart Foundation, the Young Stallions and the Powers of Pain to wrestle the Rougeaus, the Brainbusters, Demolition, Los Conquistadors and the Bolsheviks. Walking down a WWF aisle for the last time as the British Bulldogs, maybe I should have felt a bit sad or emotional. But I didn't. I felt great. I'll be honest, I didn't even need that last match. If Vince had said to us, "Here boys, here's your $20,000. It's your last night, you don't need to work," I'd have taken the money and gone home.
By the end of 1988, the team broke up. Both wrestlers left the WWF, marking the end of their partnership and the beginning of separate paths. After leaving the WWF, the British Bulldogs returned to Stampede Wrestling. However, their partnership was now fraught with animosity. Billington felt betrayed by Smith's ambitions, and their professional relationship deteriorated. In the early 1990s, Billington transitioned to All Japan Pro Wrestling, forming a new tag team with Johnny Smith. While they achieved moderate success, the team lacked the charisma and innovation of the original British Bulldogs. Meanwhile, Smith pursued opportunities in North America, focusing on a solo career. Davey Boy Smith returned to the WWF in 1990 as a singles competitor, adopting the moniker the British Bulldog. Over the next decade, he achieved significant success, winning the Intercontinental Championship, European Championship, and multiple tag team championships. His most memorable moment came at SummerSlam 1992, where he defeated Bret Hart in front of 80,000 fans at Wembley Stadium. Billington's career, in contrast, was in decline. Years of high-risk moves had taken a devastating toll on his body, leaving him with severe spinal injuries. By the mid-90s, he was confined to a wheelchair, effectively ending his career. Bruce Hart, dressed in his 1980s Bad Company gimmick, noted, "Tom's drive made him great, but he burned bridges. Davey could charm his way into any situation, and that made Tom jealous. Tom felt Davey left him behind, but in reality, Davey was just trying to survive in a business that wasn't kind to guys like Tom." The stark contrast between Smith's and Billington's post-wrestling lives highlights their different paths. At the height of his career, Smith earned significant wealth through his WWF tenure and merchandise sales. Although he faced financial difficulties later in life due to legal issues and substance abuse, Smith maintained a relatively comfortable lifestyle until his death in 2002. Billington, on the other hand, struggled financially after his wrestling career ended. Without the royalties and long-term financial planning that benefited Smith, Billington's declining health and inability to work left him in poverty. He lived his final years in a modest home in England, relying on public assistance and support from fans.
I had to hand it to Davey. For once, he'd made a good decision. A lot of wrestlers couldn't use their ring names once they'd left the company, because they were the property of the WWF. But when Vince McMahon made us the British Bulldogs in 1985, Davey, or more likely his wife, had that name trademarked. And at the time, I gave Davey credit for doing that, but even that backfired on me a few years later.
One of the most contentious aspects of the cousins' relationship revolved around the copyright of the British Bulldogs name. After the tag team dissolved, Davey Boy Smith sought to secure the rights to the brand, ensuring he could use the name to further his solo career. This legal maneuver allowed Smith to capitalize on the popularity of the team without involving Billington. Billington viewed this as a betrayal, arguing that the team's identity was a shared creation. The move symbolized Smith's growing focus on his career and financial stability, even at the cost of personal relationships. By copyrighting the name, Smith also ensured future merchandise and marketing revenue would be tied solely to him, leaving Billington excluded from any potential financial benefits derived from their shared legacy. This decision exemplified the different approaches of the two men. Smith prioritized long-term financial security, leveraging his connections with the WWF and the Hart family to establish himself as a solo star. Billington, on the other hand, lacked the resource and health to contest a copyright effectively, further deepening the rift between the cousins. In later interviews, Billington expressed bitterness over the incident, describing it as an emblematic of Smith's willingness to prioritize personal gain over family loyalty. For Smith, however, the decision was likely a pragmatic one, reflecting the harsh realities of the wrestling business where branding and intellectual property can make or break a career.
Dearly beloved, we're gathered today to give to this thing called life.
Davey Boy Smith married Diana Hart, the sister of Bret and Owen Hart, further solidifying his connection to the Hart wrestling dynasty. Both men faced legal and personal challenges. Smith struggled with substance abuse, leading to multiple arrests and health issues. Billington's personal life included domestic disputes and estranged from his family. Despite their personal conflicts, the British Bulldogs are remembered as one of the greatest tag teams in wrestling history. Their innovative style, blending technical wrestling and power moves, set a standard for future generations. However, their story also serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of fame and the importance of planning for life after wrestling. Davey Boy Smith's relative financial stability and enduring legacy contrast sharply with Billington's struggles, highlighting the different paths the wrestlers' lives can take. Today, their contributions to the wrestling world are celebrated, even as their personal tragedies remind fans of the human cost behind the spectacle. Matilda, the Bulldogs' mascot, was an integral part of their WWF gimmick. Fans adored her, and she added a unique charm to their presentation. After the team disbanded, Matilda stayed with Smith's family. She passed away a few years later, symbolizing the end of the Bulldogs era. Davey Boy Smith signed with the WCW in January 1993, marking this his first departure from the WWF other than Stampede Wrestling. His arrival came as part of WCW's effort to strengthen its roster. Smith debuted as a British Bulldog and was quickly positioned as a top talent. Over the next few years, he had notable feuds and matches, including a memorable bout with Steve Austin for the WCW World Television Championship. Unfortunately, his time in WCW was plagued by injury, including a serious back injury in 1995 that sidelined him for an extended period. Despite this, he was still respected in the locker room and had some notable appearances. However, WCW's creative direction and inconsistent booking often left him with limited opportunities and a less than prominent role. His WCW tenure ended in 1997, and he left the company to return to the WWF. From 1993 to 2002, the life of the Dynamite Kid, a legendary figure in professional wrestling, was marked by personal struggles and health issues. After retiring from active wrestling in the early 90s due to severe physical injuries, including significant damage to his back and knees, Dynamite Kid's life began to unravel. He became reclusive, battling chronic pain and substance abuse, which had been a constant issue throughout his career. Later in the 90s, his health deteriorated further, and his relationships also suffered, particularly with his family. He was estranged from many, including his brother and former tag team partner Davey Boy Smith. His physical decline was compounded by ongoing health issues such as nerve damage and heart problems, which stemmed from years of grueling in-ring work and steroid use. In the early 2000s, he was living in relative obscurity. Despite his wrestling legacy, he was rarely in the public eye. By 2002, his health had deteriorated severely. He was virtually crippled by his injuries and spent most of his time in isolation. In 2002, his condition worsened and he had multiple health scares, including a stroke and further complications due to his past lifestyle. By the end of the decade, Dynamite Kid's life was defined by his physical limitations and the consequences of his past. These two figures in wrestling, Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid, forged an unforgettable partnership as the British Bulldogs, a force of nature that electrified the ring with their power, speed, and unmatched chemistry. With bodies that could bend steel and hearts that burned with the thrill of victory, they were the rising stars of the 1980s. Their names etched in the annals of wrestling history. But like meteors crashing too close to the earth, their success came at a cost. Brutal injuries, personal demons, and the darkness of addiction slowly eroded their legacies. As time wore on, the pain of their past caught up with them. Davey Boy's body betrayed him in a tragic heart attack, and Dynamite Kid, once a titan, was left a shadow of his former self, crippled by the years of self-destruction. The British Bulldogs, who once set the world ablaze, ended up a haunting reminder of the price of glory, their stories fading too soon, leaving only the echoes of what could have been.